Every sunrise painted the same weary picture for Ilara Vance. It was a picture of cracked linoleum floors, the smell of stale coffee, and the faces of customers who, like her, were just trying to make it to the end of the day. For her, kindness wasn't a choice. It was an instinct, a small act of rebellion against a world that had given her little. Every morning, that kindness was directed at the silent, weathered man in the alley. He was a ghost, a forgotten soul she fed without question. But what if the person you see as a charity case is actually the judge of your character? What if the life you save with a simple plate of leftovers is the one that will ultimately save yours? This is the story of a secret that lived in plain sight, a secret worth billions. The fluorescent lights of the Daily Grind diner hummed a monotonous tune, a sound Ilara Vance had come to associate with the ache in her feet and the permanent scent of bacon grease that clung to her clothes. At 24, her life was a repeating cycle of 4:30 a.m. alarms, lukewarm coffee, and the relentless demands of a life lived on the razor's edge of poverty. Cleveland, Ohio, was a city of steel and resilience, but for Ilara, it mostly felt like a city of past due notices and crushing student loan debt. Her worn-out apron, with its faded "Let's Eat" logo, was like a second skin. She moved through the narrow aisles of the diner with an economy of motion born from years of practice. She could balance 3 plates on one arm, refill 5 coffee cups in a 30-second sweep, and mentally calculate a table's bill while taking another's order. She was good at her job, efficient, invisible. But every morning at precisely 6:15 a.m., Ilara performed a small, unsanctioned ritual. After the initial breakfast rush of construction workers and early bird office staff, there was a lull. In that quiet moment, she would scrape the untouched sausage links from one plate, the slightly overdone hash browns from another, and the heel of a loaf of rye bread into a cardboard takeout box. She'd add a fresh cup of hot coffee, black, just how Stan, the diner's owner, liked it, and slip out the back door. He was always there, sitting on an overturned milk crate in the alley, tucked beside the dumpster, that perpetually smelled of sour milk and onions. He never spoke. He never asked for anything. He was just a fixture, as reliable as the sunrise. He looked to be in his late 50s, with a thick but unkempt beard the color of salt and pepper. His clothes were layers of mismatched, threadbare garments that did little to ward off the biting Ohio wind. But it was his eyes that had first captured Ilara's attention. They weren't the vacant, desperate eyes she'd seen on others living on the streets. They were a startlingly clear shade of blue, intelligent and observant. They watched the world with a profound, impenetrable sadness, but also with a sharp awareness that seemed out of place with his surroundings. The first time she'd offered him food, he had simply stared at the box, then at her, for a full minute. She thought he might refuse. Then, with a slow, deliberate nod, he took it. He ate with a strange sort of dignity, never tearing at the food like a ravenous man, but eating methodically, carefully. This routine had continued for 6 months, a silent communion in a grimy alley. Ilara knew nothing about him. She had no name for him. To her, he was just the gentleman in the alley. "You're going to get me in trouble, Ilara," Stan grumbled one morning, wiping down the counter with a greasy rag. He was a portly man whose gruff exterior was a poorly constructed dam against a reservoir of kindness he tried to hide. "Food costs money. You're giving away my profits to every stray that wanders by." "He's not a stray, Stan. He's a person," Ilara said softly, not looking up from the coffee pot she was cleaning. "And it's just scraps. Food you were going to throw out anyway." Scraps add up, Stan muttered, but he didn't press the issue. He saw the dark circles under Ilara's eyes, the slight tremor in her hands when she thought no one was looking. He knew she sent most of her meager earnings to a nursing facility 2 hours south, where her mother, Sarah, was battling a particularly aggressive form of multiple sclerosis. The medical bills were a mountain, and Ilara was trying to climb it with a shovel. Stan didn't have the heart to take her small act of charity away from her. That particular morning, a Tuesday in late October, the air had a sharp, metallic bite to it. Winter was coming. Ilara pulled her thin jacket tighter as she stepped into the alley. The man was there, his shoulders hunched against the cold. She handed him the box and the steaming cup. His chapped fingers brushed against hers as he took the coffee. The brief contact sent a jolt through her, not of static, but of something else. A shared humanity. He looked at the coffee, then up at her. For the first time, his lips parted as if to speak. Ilara held her breath. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant rumble of a garbage truck. Finally, he gave another slow nod, a gesture of profound gratitude that said more than words ever could. And the moment passed. As Ilara walked back inside, she couldn't shake a strange feeling. It was the feeling that her simple, routine act of kindness was not so simple at all. She was feeding a hungry man, yes, but she was also feeding a mystery. And in a life as painfully predictable as hers, that mystery was a strange and compelling thing. She had no idea that the threads of her life and the life of this silent, forgotten man were about to become irrevocably intertwined, pulling her from the mundane reality of the daily grind into a world of unimaginable wealth, danger, and deception. The weight of her mornings was about to change, replaced by the weight of a secret that would test the very limits of her compassion and courage. The days bled into weeks, and the routine continued. Ilara worked, she worried, and she fed the silent man. The mountain of bills on her small kitchen table grew taller, a paper monument to her despair. The latest letter from the nursing home was particularly stark. They were increasing the monthly cost for her mother's specialized care. Reading it felt like a punch to the gut. She'd started taking extra shifts, working until her vision blurred with exhaustion, but it was like trying to fill the ocean with a thimble. One frigid morning, after a night of fitful sleep filled with financial anxieties, Ilara almost forgot the takeout box. She was running late, her mind a frantic mess. She slapped a few sandwiches together from the day-old bin, just as Stan was unlocking the front door. When she stepped into the alley, the man was not on his milk crate. A knot of panic, irrational and surprising, tightened in her chest. Had something happened to him? Had the police finally forced him to move? She looked around the desolate alley, her breath misting in the cold air. Then she saw him, standing near the back wall, examining a loose brick. He turned as she approached, and the relief that washed over her was embarrassingly potent. She held out the box. He took it, but instead of his usual nod, he held her gaze. "The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must," he said. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, rusty from disuse, but the words were clear, the diction perfect. It was a quote from Thucydides, from the Peloponnesian War. Ilara knew this because her father, a history professor who had passed away when she was a teenager, had been obsessed with ancient Greece. The quote, so unexpected, so jarringly intellectual, hung in the air between them. Ilara just stared, speechless. Who was this man? He seemed to notice her shock. A flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossed his face. He gave his customary nod, a return to their familiar silence, and retreated to his crate. Ilara, her mind reeling, went back inside the diner, the historian's words echoing in her ears. The next day, something even stranger happened. When she came to collect his empty box from the previous morning, which he always left neatly on the crate, there was something resting on top of it. It was a small, exquisitely carved wooden sparrow. It was no bigger than her thumb, yet the detail was breathtaking. Each feather was delicately etched. The head was cocked in a curious, lifelike pose, and the tiny claws seemed ready to grip a branch. The wood was smooth and dark, polished by countless touches. She picked it up. It was warm, as if he'd been holding it for a long time. This wasn't the work of a man whose hands were numb from cold and neglect. This was the work of an artist, a craftsman. Elara slipped the sparrow into her apron pocket, its perfect form a secret weight against her hip all day. Her curiosity was now a raging fire. The man in the alley was not what he seemed. He was a puzzle, a paradox of destitution and erudition, of homelessness and artistry. Her life, however, didn't afford her the luxury of solving mysteries. That evening, she came home to a bright orange notice taped to her apartment door, an eviction warning. She was 2 months behind on rent. Her landlord, Mr. Henderson, a man with a perpetually sour expression, had finally lost his patience. She had 10 days to pay the full balance of $1,800 or be out on the street. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She sank onto her lumpy sofa, the orange paper trembling in her hand. $1,800 might as well have been $1 million. She had exactly $74.32 in her bank account. She thought of her mother, of the promise she'd made to her dying father that she would always take care of Sarah. She felt like a failure, a fraud. Tears of frustration and helplessness streamed down her face. She pulled the small wooden sparrow from her pocket and clutched it in her fist. Its smooth, solid presence was a strange comfort, a tiny anchor in a sea of chaos. It was a beautiful, useless thing, a gift from a man who had nothing, given to a woman who was about to lose everything. The irony was so bitter it tasted like bile. The next morning, her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. She moved through her shift in a fog of despair. When 6:15 a.m. came, she almost didn't go out. What was the point? What good was her small act of kindness when her own life was imploding? But habit, or perhaps something deeper, propelled her out the back door. She handed him the food, her movements stiff, her face a mask of misery. He took the box and looked at her, his blue eyes searching her face. He saw the despair she was trying so hard to hide. He reached into the deep pocket of his worn coat and pulled out a book. It was a tattered, soft-cover edition of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He opened it to a page he had dog-eared and pointed to a passage. His finger was grimy, but it rested on the words with a steady, deliberate purpose. Elara leaned in to read the underlined sentence. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. She looked up from the page and into his eyes. He held her gaze, and in that moment, she felt a profound and inexplicable connection, a sense of being seen and understood in a way she hadn't felt in years. He wasn't just a beggar she was feeding. He was something more, something important. And as she stood there in the cold alley, clutching a book of Stoic philosophy, with an eviction notice waiting at home and a tiny perfect sparrow in her pocket, Elara Vance knew, with absolute certainty, that her life was about to change. She just had no idea how violently. The eviction notice became a ticking clock, each passing day a new wave of anxiety. Elara picked up more shifts, working double after double until the diner's patrons became a blur of faces and orders. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford, and her thoughts were a constant, frantic scramble of numbers that never added up. The encounters in the alley had changed. While the man remained largely silent, there was a new depth to their interactions. He seemed to be watching over her, his perceptive gaze missing nothing. One morning, noticing her shivering in her thin jacket, he gestured to his own multi-layered ragged coat, and then to her, a clear, unspoken offer. She'd smiled sadly and shaken her head, touched by the gesture from a man who had so much less than she did. The fragile piece of their routine was shattered on a Thursday. A sleek, black Lincoln Town car, so out of place it might as well have been a spaceship parked across the street from the diner. Elara noticed it from the window as she refilled a customer's coffee. The windows were tinted, anonymous, and menacing. An hour later, a man stepped out of the passenger side. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than Elara's rent for an entire year. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and his dark hair was slicked back, giving him a severe, predatory look. He didn't enter the diner. Instead, he stood on the sidewalk, scanning the area, his eyes lingering on the alley entrance. Elara's instincts screamed. This had nothing to do with the diner. Her gaze flickered to the clock. It was 6:05 a.m. The man in the alley would be there. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Without a second thought, she grabbed the day's offering, a container of oatmeal and a thermos of coffee, and slipped out the back door, her body tense. The silent man was on his crate, but he wasn't relaxed. He was watching the mouth of the alley, his body coiled like a spring. He had seen the car, too. "There's a man," Elara whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "In a suit. He's watching this alley." The man's clear blue eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw not sadness, but a flash of something cold and hard. It was the look of a strategist, a cornered animal calculating its odds. He didn't speak. He simply took the food, stood up, and melted into the deeper shadows at the back of the alley, disappearing behind the massive dumpster, just as the man in the suit began to walk towards them. Elara's blood ran cold. She straightened up, forcing a nonchalant posture, and started wiping down the grimy exterior of the diner's back door with a rag she'd grabbed, as if it were a normal part of her morning duties. The man in the suit stopped at the entrance to the alley. He exuded an aura of cold, corporate power. "Excuse me, miss," he said. His voice was smooth, but with an undertone of impatience. "Can I help you?" Elara asked, her voice miraculously steady. "I'm looking for someone," he said, his eyes sweeping the alley, dismissing her as unimportant. "An older gentleman, a vagrant, often sits back here." Elara's mind raced. To lie or not to lie, protecting the silent man was a reflex, an instinct she didn't question. He was hers to protect. "Lots of people come and go," she said with a shrug, turning her attention back to the door. "It's an alley. I don't keep track." The man took a step closer. He pulled a crisp $50 bill from a money clip. "Perhaps this would help you remember," he said, holding it out. Elara looked at the money. $50. It was an hour of her mother's care. It was a tank of gas. It was groceries for a week. The temptation was a physical ache. But then she thought of the carved sparrow, of the quote from Thucydides, of the piercingly intelligent eyes of the man hiding just feet away. She thought of the unspoken trust that had grown between them. She met the man's gaze, her own eyes hardening. "I said I don't know," she repeated, her voice firm. "And I don't take tips for standing in the cold." The man's smile was a thin, unpleasant line. He studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowed. "Suit yourself," he said, his voice laced with contempt. He pocketed the money, gave the alley one last, frustrated look, and walked back to the Lincoln. The car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into traffic. Elara leaned against the brick wall, her legs suddenly weak. She waited a full minute before speaking into the shadows. "He's gone." The man emerged from behind the dumpster. The hard look was gone, replaced by an expression she couldn't quite decipher. It was a mixture of gratitude, concern, and something else, appraisal. He was looking at her as if for the first time. "You put yourself at risk for me," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "He was a creep," Elara said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Why is someone like that looking for you?" He looked down at his own ragged clothes, a flicker of dark humor in his eyes. "A long-overdue library book, perhaps." He met her gaze again, his expression turning serious. "Their interest in me puts you in danger now. You must be careful, and you must not speak of me to anyone." "I won't," she said automatically. "Thank you, Elara," he said. Hearing her own name on his lips was the biggest shock of all. Her jaw went slack. She had never told him her name. She wore a generic Peggy name tag at the diner, a small joke of Stan's. How could he possibly know her name was Elara? Before she could ask, he had taken his food and retreated to the far end of the alley, leaving her alone with 1,000 new questions and a growing, terrifying sense that the mystery she had been feeding every morning was far bigger and far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The man in the alley wasn't just a puzzle, he was a target, and by protecting him, she had just painted one on herself. The encounter with the man in the suit left a residue of fear that clung to Elara like the diner's grease. Every sleek, dark car that passed by sent a fresh spike of adrenaline through her system. The diner, once a place of monotonous safety, now felt exposed. The alley, their sanctuary, felt like a trap. She had only 4 days left until the eviction. The weight of it was suffocating. During a lull in the lunch rush, she sat in a booth, her head in her hands, the orange notice clutched in her pocket. She felt the smooth, carved shape of the wooden sparrow through the thin fabric of her apron. A beautiful, useless thing. A symbol of a friendship that was now putting her in danger for a man who didn't even have a roof over his head. The absurdity of it all made a hysterical laugh bubble up in her throat. Stan saw her from across the diner. He walked over and slid into the booth opposite her, his expression unusually gentle. "You all right, kid?" Elara couldn't hold it in anymore. The story of the eviction notice, the late fees, the sheer impossibility of coming up with head $1,800 came pouring out. She didn't mention the man in the alley or the Lincoln. That was a separate, more complicated fear. Stan listened, his brow furrowed. When she was finished, he sighed heavily. "Look, Elara," he began, his voice gruff. "I can float you a couple hundred. It's not much, but—" "No, Stan," she said, wiping her eyes. "You can't. You're barely breaking even as it is. I can't take your money." "You're a good kid, too good for your own good," he said, looking away, clearly uncomfortable with the emotion of the moment. "Feeding strays when you can barely feed yourself." The shift ended at 9 p.m. The diner was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerators. As Elara was untying her apron, exhausted and defeated, she fumbled with her keys. A small cascade of items fell from her overstuffed purse. Her wallet, a tube of lip balm, and the folded eviction notice. She quickly gathered everything, but in her haste, the orange paper slid unseen under the counter. She said a tired goodnight to Stan and walked out into the cold, empty street. The walk to her bus stop was 3 blocks. Tonight, the familiar path felt menacing. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. She was halfway down the block when a voice called out from behind her. "Elara." She jumped, spinning around, her heart leaping into her throat. It was him. The man from the alley. He had stepped out from the shadows of a recessed doorway. But he was different. He had cleaned up. His beard, though still long, was trimmed. His hair was washed and combed back from his face. He wore a cleaner, though still worn, wool coat. The transformation was startling. He no longer looked like a forgotten vagrant. He looked like a distinguished professor who had fallen on hard times. "You shouldn't be here," she hissed, looking around nervously. "What if that man comes back?" "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Not here." He gestured down a side street. "Please." Against her better judgment, she followed him into the relative privacy of the darker street. He stopped under a flickering streetlight and turned to face her. The light caught the sharp intelligence in his blue eyes. "I know about your eviction," he said simply. Ilara froze. "How?" He held up the orange notice. "You dropped this at the diner. I saw it fall when you left." She stared at the paper in his hand, then at his face. The humiliation was a hot flush on her cheeks. "Give that back," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's none of your business." "I am making it my business," he said. His voice was no longer the gravelly rumble of a street person. It was crisp, authoritative, and resonated with a power that was utterly at odds with his appearance. "Ilara, what I'm about to tell you will be difficult to believe. I need you to listen with an open mind, because both of our lives may depend on it." She crossed her arms, a defensive posture against the sheer strangeness of the situation. "Try me." He took a deep breath. The next 4 words changed everything. "I am a billionaire." Ilara stared. Then she let out a short, bitter laugh. "Right. And I'm the Queen of England. Look, if this is some kind of sick joke—" "It is not a joke," he said, his expression deadly serious. "My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am the founder and CEO of Ethelred Holdings, a global logistics and technology firm." The name meant nothing to her. She shook her head in disbelief. "You're homeless. You eat scraps from a diner alley. I've been giving you my leftovers for 6 months. And you have done so with a kindness and dignity that I haven't seen in my entire life," he said, his voice softening. "You never pitied me. You never judged me. You treated me as a human being. That is a rarer commodity than all the money in the world." "I don't understand," she said, her head spinning. "I am not on the streets by choice." "Not entirely," he explained, his eyes scanning the street. "I am in hiding. Ethelred was the target of a hostile takeover by a ruthless competitor, a man named Marcus Thorne. To force me out, he fabricated evidence, digital trails, offshore accounts, framing me for massive corporate fraud and treason, selling proprietary technology to foreign powers. The authorities issued a warrant. My assets were frozen. My life was threatened. Thorne's men, like the one you saw today, are not just looking to find me. They are looking to silence me permanently." It sounded like the plot of a movie, too fantastic to be real. Yet, as she looked into his steady, sincere eyes, a sliver of belief began to wedge its way through her skepticism. It explained the quote from Thucydides, the carved bird, the way he carried himself. It explained the man in the Lincoln. "Prove it," she whispered. Arthur nodded. He reached into an inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a slim, hardened casing smartphone, the kind you see in spy thrillers. He powered it on, his thumb scanning for verification. The screen lit up. He tapped a secure app, entered a long alphanumeric password, and then showed her the screen. It was a banking interface for a private Swiss institution. The name at the top of the account was Arthur Pendleton. and the balance displayed at the bottom had so many commas she couldn't process it at first. It was over $2 billion. It was an emergency fund, he explained, untouchable by the domestic asset freeze, accessible only by him. Elara felt the pavement shift beneath her feet. The world tilted on its axis. The man she had been feeding, the man she felt sorry for, was one of the wealthiest men on the planet. The ragged, silent figure from the alley was a lie, a costume. I couldn't risk accessing this or contacting my allies, Arthur continued, putting the phone away. Any digital trail could lead Thorne right to me. So I disappeared. I became a ghost. I had to see who I could trust. I had to wait until the hunt for me died down. But they are getting closer. The man you saw is one of Thorne's top fixers, a man named Julian Croft. He looked at her, his expression grim. Elara. By protecting me, by lying to him, you have entangled yourself in this. You are in danger now, but you have also shown me that you are the one person I can trust. I need your help, and in return I can solve every problem you have, and more. The cold night air seemed to buzz around her. Eviction, her mother's bills, student loans, a life of scraping by. And here was the solution, a fantastical, terrifying solution, standing before her in a borrowed coat. What? What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The question, she knew, was a point of no return. Elara's apartment had never felt so small. It was a cramped, one-bedroom walk-up with peeling paint and a temperamental radiator, but it had always been her sanctuary. Now, it was the temporary headquarters for a fugitive billionaire. Arthur Pendleton sat at her small, wobbly kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea, looking utterly out of place amidst her collection of mismatched mugs and leaning stacks of overdue bills. The transition from alley to apartment had been surreal. He had insisted on stopping at an all-night drugstore where, using a small roll of cash he had stashed away, he bought a prepaid burner phone. My first move back on the grid, he'd murmured. Every step has to be perfect. Now, in the relative safety of her home, he began to lay out the full story. He spoke of Marcus Thorne, not just as a business rival, but as a sociopath with limitless resources. Thorne hadn't just wanted Ethelred Holdings, he wanted to destroy Arthur, to salt the earth of his legacy. The fraud allegations were just the beginning. There's a fail-safe, Arthur explained, his blue eyes intense. A small encrypted hard drive. It contains the original untampered server logs, communications between Thorne and his conspirators, and the proof of the fabricated evidence. It's the key to everything. It proves my innocence and exposes Thorne's entire criminal enterprise. So where is it? Elara asked, wrapping her hands around her own mug for warmth. That's the problem, Arthur sighed. It's in the one place I can't go. My office. The executive suite on the top floor of the Ethelred Tower downtown. The building is controlled by Thorne's new board, and it's crawling with his security. Elara stared at him. You want to break into your own company? Precisely. And I can't do it alone. My most trusted people were forced out. The few I still have contact with are watched. I need someone clean. Someone completely off Thorne's radar. I need you, Elara. The sheer audacity of the plan was staggering. Her, a waitress, helping a billionaire pull off a corporate espionage mission. It was insane. But as she looked at Arthur, she didn't see a crazy person. She saw a man who had lost everything, fighting to get his life back. A man who, despite his circumstances, had maintained his dignity and intellect. She thought of the $50 bill Julian Croft had offered her, and the lie she had told to protect this man before she even knew his name. She was already in. Okay, she said, her voice firmer than she felt. What's the plan? A look of immense relief washed over Arthur's face. First, we solve your immediate problem. He gestured towards the eviction notice on the table. Thorne's people might be watching the banks, but they aren't watching a waitress in Cleveland making a late rent payment. I can't access my funds directly, but I have other resources. There's a safety deposit box under a different name. It contains cash and some untraceable bearer bonds, enough to get us started. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind. Following Arthur's meticulous instructions, Elara took a bus to a small, private bank in a quiet suburb. She used a key Arthur gave her and a password, Themistocles, to access a box registered to a Mr. Silas Kane. Inside was a shocking amount of cash and several official-looking bond certificates. She felt like a spy in a movie. That afternoon, she walked into her landlord's office and paid not only the $1,800 in back rent, but the next 6 months in advance. The look of stunned silence on Mr. Henderson's face was worth every nervous moment. Next, she went to her own bank and paid off the highest interest portion of her student loans. Finally, she called the nursing home and settled her mother's entire outstanding balance, ensuring her care for the next year. Each transaction felt like shedding a physical weight she had been carrying for years. For the first time since her father's death, she could breathe. The constant, gnawing anxiety that had been her companion for so long was suddenly gone. It was a heady, disorienting feeling, but the relief was tempered by the reality of the man living in her spare room. Arthur was a man of action, and being cooped up in her tiny apartment was clearly a strain. He paced, he strategized, and he used the burner phone to make a single brief call. "David, it's me. Protocol Phoenix is active," Arthur said into the phone, his voice low. After a pause, he continued. "The asset is compromised. I'm with a civilian. She's secure. I need a full schematic of the tower's current security layout. Focus on the 40th floor. And David, it's good to hear your voice." He hung up. "David Hayes," he explained to Elara, "my former head of security. Thorne fired him, but he's fiercely loyal, and the best in the business. He's our man on the outside." That evening, as Elara cooked a simple meal of pasta and salad, real food, not diner scraps, the reality of her new life began to sink in. She was harboring a fugitive, she was an accomplice, and she was about to commit breaking and entering. "Are you scared?" Arthur asked, watching her from the table. "Terrified," she admitted. "But I'm also not. For the past 5 years, I've been scared of bills, of collection calls, of my mum's next medical crisis. That's a slow, grinding fear that eats you alive. This is different. It's sharp, it's immediate, and for the first time, it feels like I'm fighting back instead of just sinking." Arthur Pendleton, the billionaire who had commanded boardrooms and built a global empire, looked at the young waitress who had shown him kindness when he had nothing. "You have a spirit, Elara Vance, that Marcus Thorne, with all his money and power, could never understand. That's why we're going to win." A secure email arrived on a new, encrypted laptop that a courier, discreetly arranged by David, dropped off the next day. It contained the security schematics, guard rotations, and camera placements for the Ethelred Tower. As they hunched over the glowing screen, the plan began to take shape. It was dangerous, complex, and hinged on split-second timing. It also hinged on Elara. "The server room that contains the security hub is on the 39th floor, Arthur pointed out. "David can loop the camera feeds for the 40th floor, but only for a 10-minute window. That's all the time we'll have inside my office. But to do that, Someone needs to physically access a maintenance terminal in the sub-level basement to give him a port. The guards down there are lazy, but they're still there. I'm too recognizable, even with a disguise. It has to be you. Ilara's blood turned to ice. It was one thing to be a lookout. It was another to be the one taking the first, most critical risk. Her? A waitress? In the heart of the enemy's territory? The slow, grinding fear she thought she'd left behind came rushing back, colder than ever. The Ethelred Tower was a monument of glass and steel that scraped the Cleveland sky. To Ilara, it had always been just another part of the downtown skyline. Now, it was a fortress she had to breach. The plan was set for a Friday night. According to David's intelligence, security was at its most lax during the late-night cleaning crew shift change. The plan had 2 phases, both of which made Ilara's stomach churn. Phase 1 was her infiltration. Dressed in a nondescript janitorial uniform several sizes too big, which David had procured, she looked nothing like herself. Her hair was tucked under a beanie, and a pair of large, non-prescription glasses hid her eyes. In her pocket was a high-end RFID cloner, a device that looked like a simple key fob. The basement security chief, a guy named Henderson, is a creature of habit, Arthur had explained, pointing to the schematics on the laptop. At 10:45 p.m., he walks to the vending machine at the end of the hall for a bag of pretzels. It's a 2-minute walk, round trip. On his way, you need to accidentally bump into him. The cloner only needs to be within a foot of his master keycard for a second. It will do the rest. At 10:30 p.m., Ilara stood in the service alley behind the tower, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was just a waitress. What was she doing? Arthur's voice, calm and steady, came through the tiny, flesh-colored earpiece she wore. You can do this, Ilara. Remember what you do every day at the diner. You read people. You anticipate their movements. This is no different. Just a different customer. Taking a deep breath, she slipped in behind a group of actual cleaning staff, her borrowed ID badge getting her past the first checkpoint. She kept her head down, pushing a large yellow mop bucket that David's contact had left for her. The basement was a labyrinth of concrete corridors and humming pipes. It smelled of bleach and damp earth. She found the right hallway and waited, her back to the corner, pretending to clean a scuff mark on the floor. At 10:44 p.m., just as predicted, a portly guard with a bored expression, Henderson, emerged from the security office, jingling his keys. This was it. Ilara started pushing her mop bucket towards him, her eyes on the floor. As he drew level, she lurched, as if the bucket's wheel had caught on something. She stumbled right into his path. "Whoa, watch it," he grunted, stepping back. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir." "So sorry," Ilara mumbled, not making eye contact. The cloner in her hand vibrated for a fraction of a second. It was done. "Just watch where you're going," Henderson grumbled, and continued on his way to the vending machine. Ilara ducked into a utility closet, her body trembling. "I got it," she whispered into her comm. "I never doubted you," Arthur's voice replied. "Now, the maintenance terminal. Room B12. You have 90 seconds. She found the room, swiped the newly cloned access, and the door clicked open. The terminal was right where David said it would be. Her hands shaking, she plugged in the small USB device David had provided. A light on the stick blinked green. "David's in," she whispered. "Get out of there. Now," Arthur commanded. "Leave the uniform and bucket in the designated spot. Exit through the North Service entrance." 10 minutes later, Ilara was back on the street, dressed in her own clothes, her heart still racing. She melted into the shadows a block away, watching the tower. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 2 was Arthur. A catering van, one of Stan's old, semi-retired vehicles that Arthur had rented for a generous fee, pulled up to the tower's main entrance. David had hacked the building's scheduling system and inserted a last-minute, high-priority food delivery for the skeletal night staff in the main security hub. The driver was David Hayes himself, dressed as a delivery man. In the back of the van, hidden among insulated food containers, was Arthur Pendleton. He was dressed in a dark, tactical outfit, his face grim with determination. "The cameras on 40 are looping now," David said into his own comms as he unloaded a cart. "You have 10 minutes, Arthur. Go." While David distracted the front desk guards with free sandwiches and coffee, Arthur slipped out the back of the van and, using the cloned keycard data David had just transferred to a blank card, accessed a fire stairwell. 40 flights of stairs for a man who had been living on the streets was a brutal ascent, but adrenaline was a powerful fuel. Ilara, watching from her vantage point, held her breath. The 10-minute countdown had begun in her head. Arthur's voice, strained and breathless, came over the comm. "I'm on the 40th floor. The office is just as I left it." Ilara could hear the faint sounds of him moving, the quiet click of a desk drawer. "It's not here," Arthur grunted after a few moments of searching. Thorne must have had the office swept. Panic flared in Ilara's chest. "Arthur, you have 7 minutes left." "Think, Arthur. Think," he muttered to himself. Then, a sharp intake of breath. Of course, it wouldn't be somewhere obvious. Ilara listened to the sound of something heavy being moved. "The large oak bookshelf against the west wall," Arthur narrated, his breathing heavy. "My father built it. He always said the best hiding places are built on sentiment, not complexity." A click, a faint whirring sound. "There's a false back. The drive is here. I have it," he said, a note of triumph in his voice. "I have it." 5 minutes, Arthur," Ilara urged. Suddenly, a new voice broke through the comms, frantic and sharp. It was David. "Arthur, abort! Julian Croft is in the building. He just got on the executive elevator. He's coming up. They must have a silent alarm I didn't find." Ilara's blood ran cold. The elevator was fast. Croft would be there in less than a minute. "Go, Arthur! Get out of there!" she yelled into the comm. "No time for the stairs," Arthur said, his voice dangerously calm. "I'm trapped." The vision of Julian Croft's cold, merciless face flashed in Ilara's mind. They were so close. To fail now, to have Arthur caught. It was unthinkable. Her mind, sharpened by months of stress and quick thinking in the diner, raced over the schematics she had memorized. The layout of the 40th floor was etched in her brain. "The window, Arthur," she said, her voice a shot in the dark. "Your office, the large window behind your desk. Does it open?" "It's sealed. A skyscraper," he started to say. "No, not to open it," she pressed, an idea, a crazy, desperate idea forming. "The window washing rig, the maintenance cradle, is the access point on your balcony." There was a pause. The ding of the elevator arriving on the 40th floor echoed faintly through Arthur's comm. "Yes," he said, his voice filled with a new, dawning understanding. "Yes, it is." "Get on it," Ilara commanded, her voice shaking but firm. "Get on it now." She had no idea if it would work, if he could even operate it, but it was the only chance he had. In her mind's eye, she saw him cornered, the sleek form of Julian Croft stepping out of the elevator, a wolf closing in for the kill. "The cradle is locked down, Ilara. I can't override it from here." Arthur's voice was tight with tension over the comms. Ilara could hear the distinct sound of a key card sliding into the office door lock. Croft was there. "David!" Ilara shouted into her tiny microphone. "Can you do anything? The maintenance cradle on 40. "On it," David's reply was clipped and immediate. "Bypassing the local lockdown. It'll be messy. It will trigger every alarm in the building. But it'll move. He'll have 60 seconds of control before they freeze it again. Tell him to get ready." Elara relayed the message, her heart hammering. "Arthur, you heard him. Go!" A loud crash echoed through the earpiece as Arthur shattered the glass door to the balcony. A cacophony of alarms began to blare across the city. Through the comm, Elara heard Croft shout, "Pendleton, don't move!" Then came the whir of a motor and the rush of wind. "I'm on," Arthur said, his voice strained against the gale. "I'm moving." Elara watched, her mouth agape, as a small metal platform detached from the top of the Ethelred Tower and began a jerky, rapid descent down the side of the building. It was a sight so unbelievable it defied logic. A billionaire escaping on a window-washing rig. "He's heading for the 35th floor observation deck," David's voice crackled. "It's a public space, closed for the night. I can get him in from there. Elara, you need to be gone. The police will have this area locked down in minutes." She didn't need to be told twice. She turned and ran, melting into the night, the sound of sirens growing behind her. The next few hours were an agonizing blur. She made it back to her apartment, her entire body shaking with residual adrenaline. She had no idea if Arthur had made it, if he was safe, if he'd been caught. She sat in her dark living room, watching the flashing lights of distant police cars paint streaks across her wall. At 3 a.m. there was a soft knock on her door. She opened it to find David Hayes. He was calm, composed, and gave her a small, reassuring smile. "He's safe," David said. "He has the drive. It's over." The relief was so immense, Elara felt her knees buckle. David caught her arm, steadying her. "He sent me to tell you he'll be in touch as soon as the dust settles. He also said to give you this." He handed her a plain white envelope. Inside was a cashier's check made out to Elara Vance. The amount was for $250,000. Tucked behind it was a handwritten note on a small piece of paper. "Elara, this is just the beginning. A thank you is not enough. You saved my life. You saved my legacy. You are the most courageous person I have ever known. Rest. A new morning is coming. Yours, Arthur." Tears streamed down her face. Tears of relief, of shock, of a future she couldn't possibly comprehend. The news broke the next morning. It was a media firestorm. Billionaire mogul Marcus Thorne, arrested in sweeping fraud and conspiracy scandal. The story was everywhere. The evidence on Arthur's hard drive was irrefutable and explosive. It didn't just exonerate him. It implicated Thorne in a dozen other illegal activities. By noon, Ethelred Holdings stock was in freefall, and by the end of the day, the board had been completely dismantled. 2 weeks later, a black car, a comfortable sedan this time, not a menacing Lincoln, picked Elara up. It took her not to a grimy alley or a tense safe house, but to the front door of the Daily Grind diner. Arthur Pendleton was waiting for her inside. He was transformed. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his beard gone, his hair neatly cut, he looked every bit the powerful CEO. But when he smiled at her, she saw the same man she had shared coffee with in the cold. His eyes still held the same intelligence and a newfound warmth. The diner was empty, a closed for private event sign on the door. Stan was there, looking flustered and wearing his best shirt. "Elara," Arthur began, his voice filled with sincere emotion. "I can never truly repay you. I can give you money, and I will. I've set up a trust in your name that will ensure you and your mother are cared for the rest of your lives. Your student loans have been paid in full." Elara was speechless. The scale of his gratitude was beyond her imagination. But a check feels hollow for what you did, he continued. You didn't help me for money. You helped me because it was the right thing to do. You have a gift for seeing the person, not their circumstances. And that gift deserves a better place to shine than this. He gestured around the diner. So I bought it. Stan beamed. He gave me a price I couldn't refuse. I'm retiring to Florida, kid. It's yours, Elara, Arthur said, along with the entire building it's attached to. I've also established a charitable foundation in your name, the Vance Foundation, with an initial endowment of $50 million. Its mission will be to provide housing, job training, and mental health services for the homeless population of this city. You will be its director, should you choose to accept. Elara looked around the familiar, greasy diner. She looked at Stan, bursting with pride. She looked at Arthur, the man whose life she had saved, and who was now, in turn, saving hers. She thought of the cold mornings, the crushing debt, the feeling of utter hopelessness. Then she thought of the carved sparrow, a small, perfect thing made by a man who had nothing and everything all at once. On one condition, Elara said, finding her voice. Anything, Arthur replied. The diner stays open, she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. We'll renovate it. We'll call it Elara's Haven. And on the menu every single day there will be a free hot meal for anyone who needs it. No questions asked. Arthur Pendleton's smile was brilliant. I wouldn't have expected anything less. The sun streamed through the diner's front window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a new morning, brighter than any Elara had ever known. Her life was no longer about just getting by. It was about giving back, on a scale she had never dreamed possible. Her simple, daily act of kindness in a forgotten alley hadn't just changed a billionaire's life. It had changed the world for thousands, starting with her own. Elara Vance's story reminds us of a powerful, often forgotten truth. The true measure of our wealth is not what we have, but what we give. Her compassion wasn't an investment. It was an instinct. She gave without expecting anything in return, and in doing so, unlocked a future she couldn't have imagined. This story isn't just about a billionaire in disguise. It's about the profound impact of seeing the humanity in everyone, regardless of their circumstances. It challenges us to look closer at the people we pass by every day, to remember that every person has a story, and sometimes a simple act of kindness can be the key that changes everything. If this story of compassion and unexpected fortune moved you, please take a moment to click the like button below. Share it with someone who might need a reminder of the good in the world. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true-to-life stories that remind us of the magic hidden in the mundane. Thank you for listening.